y'all for joining in. So as we continue to think about Hinduism, I think for most of us in the Western world, there's several things that might come to mind. Yoga, which is so widely practiced, and we have several yoga teachers in our community, was traditionally practiced as a school of Hindu philosophy, advocating and prescribing a course of physical and mental disciplines to attain liberation from the material world and union of the self with the supreme being, Brahma, the ultimate reality. Today, many non-Hindus practice yoga as a centering spiritual practice or as physical exercise. The chant Om, which several of us chanted once or twice, is something that a lot of us know is connected with Hinduism as a meditation practice. The belief in reincarnation, the returning of the soul life after life until one is freed from ignorance and wrongdoing, is something that is very common. Well, it's a traditional belief in Hinduism, but it's also a belief system in other religious traditions, and many Unitarian Universalists believe in reincarnation. Many of us may know a little bit about the caste system, which is no longer officially recognized in India. And, you know, I think we've all heard that Hindus worship cows, whereas the reality is that they hold all life as sacred. So most Hindus are vegetarian, although I've had some interesting experience with non-vegetarian Hindus in the last year or so. Perhaps the most famous modern Hindu that we know of is Mahatma Gandhi, who has influenced religious communities, including Unitarian Universalists and liberation movements around the world. Our own forebears gathered, as I said before, with Hindu philosophers, and they helped influence our development of our principles and purposes, where one of our sources is to honor the wisdom of the world's religions. So all this is wonderful, but the reality is that most of us Westerners get confused about the complexities of Hindu gods, goddesses, its epic stories that teach moral and cultural lessons, and its social structures. But underlying all this complexity is the primary question in Hinduism, and I would say in all religions: what can we do about human suffering? In response to this question, Hindus seek the liberation of the soul as one of the central goals of human life. The other three goals are Dharma, living a virtuous moral life; Artha, having material prosperity and income security; and Kama, emotional, sensual, and pleasure fulfillment. Hinduism is not, as we think of religion often in the West, as something you do on Sunday or Friday or Saturday. Hinduism is a way of life, and it's woven into every aspect of one's being. And while there are Vedic centers around the country, we have one in Greenville, a couple in Atlanta, the primary expression of Hinduism is in the home. Every home has a room or a special place where the family altar resides and where family members pray daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Throughout the year, there are many festivals during which the Hindu community gathers, and we're currently in the midst of Navaratri, which I knew nothing about until I received an invitation to attend some of the festivities last week. So during this festival, believers invoke the energy aspect of God in the form of the universal mother. So here's another connection to earth-centered goddess religions. The universal mother is Durga, whose name removes all the miseries of life. Mothers are the same around the world. She is also referred to as Devi, goddess, or Shakti, energy and power. It is this energy through which the work of creation, preservation, and destruction of the world takes place. In other words, you might say that God, Brahma, is motionless, changeless, and that the Divine Mother, Durga, makes everything happen. Truly speaking, from a Hindu perspective, the worship of Shakti reconfirms the scientific theory that energy is imperishable. It cannot be created or destroyed. It changes form, but it's always there. So in the past, since I've lived in Clemson, I've been very fortunate to visit in the homes of several Hindu families. And, there are a couple of students that I'm now doing a little tutoring for. So I could clearly remember one dinner when there were like 5 or 6 Hindu families, and they're all from one area of India. So they were all speaking Gujarati. So I was like trying to, join in, but I'm bad with languages anyway. So I was like, okay, so I'll watch the television program that the kids are watching. So, being a Unitarian Universalist, there were these like epic stories in cartoon form with Krishna, who's blue and not like the genie on Disney, but, so I kept saying to the older kids, so what does that mean? And then I'd say, okay, can you explain this to me? And finally, one of the high school students said, they have this in English on YouTube. So I invite you to, connect up to YouTube and look for any of the epic stories or questions that you might have about Hinduism to continue your education. Hinduism, as it's practiced today, evolved from the early formative period in the Indus Valley of India about 4,500 years ago. The invasion of the Aryans about 3,500 years ago brought the development of Vedic literature to India, and the most well-known of that literature are the Vedas. The Bhagavad Gita, known by many non-Hindus, is part of the epic Mahabharata, written sometime between the 5th and 2nd century BCE. The literature developed during the period between 800 and 400 BCE emerged as philosophers and yogins sought to explore beneath the Vedic phenomena and deities to discover an underlying reality for existence. Our reading this morning came from that period. From 600 to 1800 in the Common Era, Hinduism was primarily focused on the devotion of personal deities such as Krishna, Ganesha, Kali, many others. During much of this period, Hinduism was also influenced by Islam, and in turn it influenced the Muslim mystics called the Sufis. During the modern era of Hinduism, from 1800 on, Hinduism was greatly influenced by the West and by British colonial rule. This period, which involved repression, also inspired many reforms focused on social concerns inspired by Hindu saints such as Ramakrishna and Mahatma Gandhi. While Hinduism has evolved greatly in the last century or so, the society is so much more traditional that many Westerners don't feel particularly comfortable with their experiences in certain parts of Hinduism, particularly with respect to the rights of women, minority groups, and the poor, although that is changing very rapidly. As I tutor a couple of Hindu college students, I'm learning also about Western ideas that feel very uncomfortable to Hindu immigrants, such as the perceived lack in the larger society of family values, which Hindus take very seriously, the disrespect of elders, and a lack of modesty. All of those are very important. So it's sort of interesting in my little neighborhood where I live, because it is inconceivable to these families that somebody like me with gray hair would live by myself, that I would not live in a multi-generational family. But, you know, the result is I get great Indian food because they feel sorry for me. While there are huge differences between Hinduism and Western religions, including Unitarian Universalism, there are also themes where there is unity, including a common commitment to the shared belief in the interdependent web of existence, a belief that all creation is part of one sacred unity and that nothing is outside the whole. The human family is enriched when we learn from other religious traditions and cultures. So we are grateful for the contributions of Hinduism to the human family. I invite us now to rise in body or spirit to sing hymn 190, only verses 1 and 3. I could not live with some of the language in verse 2. So we'll have verses 1 and 3.